At 9:15 p.m. on Saturday, July 26, 2025, the town centre of Dewsbury, West Yorkshire, England, erupted into sudden, violent chaos. A man, his eyes bloodshot under the heavy influence of illicit substances, was frantically brandishing a large, sharp knife in a crowded public area. Minutes prior, he had carried out a string of brazen robberies at local convenience stores and had screamed a blood-curdling threat directly into the face of an Asda supermarket worker. "I'll stab you. Mate, I'll stab you." When West Yorkshire police officers converged to surround him, the suspect refused to drop his weapon. Instead, he charged toward a busy nearby pub, presenting an immediate and deadly threat to the lives of dozens of innocent patrons. To prevent a public massacre, responding patrol officers immediately deployed their tasers. The high-voltage prongs struck the man's body, instantly paralyzing his motor functions and sending him crashing onto the concrete pavement. Yet, as officers pinned him down and locked the handcuffs around his wrists, the subbed monster did not plead or resist. Instead, he threw his head back and brayed a confession that sent chills down the spines of everyone present. "Get armed response and SIO to me now because I've got murder. I've got a dead body in my house." The frantic midnight confession of the knife-wielding criminal triggered an immediate, high-priority investigation. A tactical police unit raced to the suspect's residence on Norfolk Street in the town of Batley. Forcing entry into the dark, silent house, officers made a gruesome discovery. The cold, badly battered body of a 21-year-old woman lay slumped on the living room sofa. The street-side confession was not a drug-induced hallucination. It was the horrific conclusion of a sadistic, sexually motivated onslaught that stemmed from a profoundly disturbing motive: the unchecked, narcissistic rage of a man who could not handle a romantic rejection. Chapter I: The Legomosque and the Criminal History of Michael Doherty. The man wrestled to the ground on the streets of Dewsbury was identified as 38-year-old Michael Doherty. However, to veteran investigators of the West Yorkshire Police, that name was merely a fresh layer of deception. In 2018, the suspect had legally changed his name from his birth name, Michael Moore, to Michael Doherty. This was a calculated maneuver to scrub his dark criminal history from public databases, allowing him to fly under the radar of social monitoring systems and easily build trust with those around him, particularly young women. Behind his thin veneer of an ordinary landlord, Doherty harbored a terrifying record of 23 prior convictions. Behavioral analysis compiled by law enforcement revealed a distinct systemic pattern. Doherty routinely reacted with extreme, sadistic violence whenever a woman dared to reject him or defy his demands for control. 12 years before the tragedy on Norfolk Street in 2013, he had been convicted of a brutal sexual assault and sentenced to 5 years in prison for raping a complete stranger. His modus operandi back then was deeply predatory. He targeted a young woman outside a nightclub late at night, posing as a polite, chivalrous gentleman offering to walk her home safely in the dark. However, the moment he maneuvered her into a secluded, unlit alleyway, he dropped his facade, physically overpowered her, and subjected her to a horrific sexual assault. After serving his 5-year sentence, Doherty's violent, entitled nature remained completely unrehabilitated. Instead, it escalated. He eventually entered into a brief relationship with another local woman. But the moment she recognized his psychological instability and broke things off to protect herself, Doherty launched a vicious campaign of retaliation. In the dead of night, he secretly approached her residence and torched her car, burning it to a crisp, a deliberate act of arson designed to send a clear, menacing warning that anyone who abandoned him would pay a severe price. Alongside these high-profile crimes, his record spanned numerous convictions for assault causing bodily harm, armed robbery, and persistent harassment. He possessed a severely damaged, highly narcissistic personality structure, viewing women as mere prizes or property obligated to submit to his desires, and treating any form of rejection as an unforgivable insult to his warped ego. This history of escalation turned the house on Norfolk Street into a lethal trap for anyone who crossed its threshold. Chapter 2: The Rejection on Norfolk Street. The victim of this tragic case, Courtney Angus, was a 21-year-old young woman with a pure, sweet soul who was deeply loved by her family and friends. Described by relatives as the life of any room she walked into, Courtney brought warmth, laughter, and genuine kindness to everyone she encountered. At the time, she was working hard to build an independent life in West Yorkshire, serving as a popular member of the bar staff at the Fox and Hounds pub in Batley. Though she had only been with the establishment for a short while, she left a lasting impression on management and regulars alike. Remembered as a sweet, compassionate person who always greeted everyone with a genuine smile. In mid-July 2025, seeking a convenient living arrangement close to work to save on living expenses, Courtney decided to rent a room inside the Norfolk Street house managed by Michael Doherty. From the very moment she moved her belongings in, Courtney demonstrated a mature and highly cautious mindset. She proactively established a clear, unambiguous personal boundary with her landlord. She explicitly told Doherty from day one that she was moving in strictly as a tenant and a platonic housemate, and that she had absolutely no desire, interest, or intention of ever pursuing a romantic, emotional, or intimate relationship with him. Courtney believed that establishing this boundary up front would ensure a harmonious, respectful living arrangement under a shared roof. However, to a deeply distorted predator like Doherty, living under the same roof with a vibrant young woman like Courtney merely triggered his predatory instincts. He completely disregarded the boundaries she had set, persistently targeting her with unwanted advances and crude flirtations. Over the following days, Courtney was forced to constantly evade his uncomfortable behavior, repeatedly reaffirming her stance politely but firmly. This silent yet unyielding resistance from the young woman shattered the entitled illusions of the narcissistic criminal, causing tension inside the house to surge to a volatile tipping point as his desire for control shifted into a calculated campaign of emotional harassment. Chapter 3: The Manipulative Text of July 25. The deadly escalation reached its boiling point on July 25, 2025. Realizing that his crude advances were being consistently shut down by Courtney's firm boundaries, Michael Doherty shifted his tactics to a deeply manipulative and cowardly method, threatening suicide to weaponize her empathy. Throughout that afternoon, Doherty bombarded Courtney's phone with a string of text messages filled with toxic self-pity and resentment, attempting to crush her psychologically and force her into submission out of fear for his life. In one text message, Doherty wrote, explicitly blaming his mental state on her boundaries. "I'm fed up of this life. Fed up of being nice. And to be honest, it's not just you. I can't take much more of life." This was a textbook psychological trap utilized by abusive, controlling individuals. By framing his survival around her choices, he attempted to shift the burden of guilt onto her shoulders, trying to make Courtney believe that if she continued to refuse him, she would be directly responsible for his death. But Courtney Angus possessed an independent mind and a resilient spirit. She recognized this toxic manipulation and delivered a sharp, definitive response to protect her personal boundaries. "It's not my fault, Mikey. I don't want a relationship. I told you this from the start. I haven't led you on. I've been a good friend to you. I'm sorry." Official trial records also preserved a secondary, highly resolute text exchange from the victim's phone from that day. "Not my fault, Mikey. I don't want a relationship. I told you this from the start. I haven't led you on or filled your mind with anything. I've been a good friend to you." Courtney's clear, quiet, and entirely unmanipulable rejection was the final blow to Doherty's fragile, narcissistic ego. His inability to dominate her mind triggered an explosion of physical savagery, unlocking the uninhibited monster within. Chapter 4: 76 Rounds in a Night of Sadistic Brutality. On the evening of July 25, 2025, the closed confines of the house on Norfolk Street turned into a horrific crime scene. Prosecutor Craig Hassel later demonstrated before the jury at Leeds Crown Court that forensic data and digital timelines proved that immediately prior to her death, Courtney Angus had once again flatly rejected Doherty's aggressive demands for physical intimacy. At the time, Doherty was heavily intoxicated by a volatile combination of hard liquor and a severe amount of illicit narcotics. The chemical impairment, combined with the total shattering of his narcissistic pride, caused him to launch a ferocious physical assault on Courtney, initiating an onslaught that prosecutors officially classified as a sadistic and sexually motivated attack. Hassel emphasized that Doherty proceeded to sexually humiliate and abuse Courtney in every degrading way his twisted mind could conceive, unleashing his explosive rage onto her defenseless body. Courtney fought back with every ounce of strength she possessed, desperately clawing at her attacker to protect her life and dignity. This courageous resistance was tragically proven during the forensic analysis, which revealed that her fingernails were completely broken and torn from fighting back against the suspect. However, against the sheer physical weight and strength of a veteran violent criminal, Courtney's desperate self-defense was ultimately overwhelmed. Doherty unleashed a flurry of high-impact, blunt force blows directly to her head and face before wrapping his hands around her neck. The forensic pathologist concluded that Courtney Angus's primary cause of death was asphyxiation due to external pressure applied to the neck, compounded by severe concussive head trauma. The sheer brutality of the beating fractured 2 of her ribs, which punctured her lung and inflicted extensive internal trauma to her spleen. In total, medical examiners documented Beimasao separate injuries chung-cheat across her body, mapping out the terrifying extent of the onslaught before she finally suffocated. The depravity of Michael Doherty reached its absolute zenith after Courtney Truthoite Kuikung. Displaying a chilling lack of remorse or panic, he remained completely calm in the presence of her corpse. He used a knife to brutally mutilate her body, severing portions of her remains and coldly arranging them on the living room fireplace mantel like a row of display trophies. Following this, Doherty utilized his cell phone to capture a series of graphic, indecent images of Courtney's naked, blood-covered body. The monster even went so far as to pose for a selfie, smiling arrogantly right next to Courtney's beaten, lifeless remains as she lay slumped on his sofa. These photographs served as definitive, undeniable evidence of his sadism, proving he extracted sick pleasure from completely overpowering a woman's physical existence. Chapter V: The Rampage and the Critical Mistake at Aldi. At 3 a.m. on Saturday, July 26, 2025, just hours after the murder, Doherty began executing a crude plan to fabricate an alibi. He placed a call to a close friend, and when it went unanswered, he fired off a text message that would later shock the court. "I've killed someone, ring me please." He followed this message with a Saukiat voice note sent via social media, attempting to rewrite the narrative of Courtney's death. In the recording, he falsely claimed to his friend that the bird had come at him with a knife, and he had simply knocked her spark out in self-defense, and now she was dead on his sofa. This was a calculated attempt to smear the character of a deceased victim, attempting to transform himself from a sadistic murderer into a justified actor of self-defense. When his frantic attempts to secure assistance failed, Doherty plummeted into an unstable, drug-fueled psychosis, launching a violent, chaotic rampage across Batley and neighboring Dewsbury later that morning. He stormed into various local shops, openly stealing food and merchandise while terrorizing staff. During a chaotic raid inside an Aldi supermarket, store employees actively intervened to halt his theft, triggering a violent physical altercation. As Doherty thrashed around frantically to break free from their grip, he accidentally dropped his cell phone onto the supermarket floor. He fled the store, entirely unaware that the abandoned phone contained the definitive proof of his crime: the graphic selfies taken next to Courtney's body. Unchecked by the loss of his phone, Doherty continued his violent spree, moving into the heart of Dewsbury town center. At 9:15 p.m., he entered a large Asda store and attempted to walk out with stolen merchandise without paying. When a male employee confronted him, Doherty pulled out a large, menacing blade, thrust it toward the worker, and bellowed, "I'll stab you, mate, I'll stab you." The emergency panic alarm was triggered instantly, and management contacted the West Yorkshire Police at 9:20 p.m. to report an active armed robbery. This emergency call directly initiated the high-stakes tactical deployment, leading to his dramatic arrest via taser outside the pub and his spontaneous confession, as detailed at the start of this record. Chapter 6: The Hammer of Justice at Leeds Crown Court in 2026. Following his tactical arrest and the recovery of Courtney Angus's body from the Norfolk Street sofa, Michael Doherty was formally charged with a slate of severe offenses: first-degree murder, theft, affray, and 3 counts of threatening another with an article with a blade or point in a public place. The formal criminal proceedings commenced at Leeds Crown Court, initially overseen by Judge Tom Bayliss KC. During his initial arraignment via video link from a maximum security prison, the killer appeared under his previous legal name, Michael Moore, 37, before prison records corrected his age to 38 based on his verified identity documentation. Judge Tom Bayliss KC originally scheduled the formal trial for January 26, 2026, estimating a 5-day duration for the jury to evaluate the highly complex forensic and digital evidence. Throughout every single court appearance, Courtney Angus's grieving mother and sisters remained present in the gallery, anchored by a specialized family liaison officer. Confronted with an overwhelming, airtight mountain of evidence, specifically the graphic, sadistic images recovered from the phone he dropped at Aldi, his DNA profile on the victim's body, and the dashboard camera recordings of his street-side confession, the defense's strategy completely disintegrated. In January 2026, recognizing the total futility of a trial, Michael Doherty signed a formal confession, entering a guilty plea to all counts. His plea bypassed the jury trial phase, moving the case directly to formal sentencing on May 28, 2026, under the jurisdiction of Judge Guy Curl KC, the Recorder of Leeds, one of the most formidable and strict legal minds in the British judiciary. At the final sentencing hearing, defense attorney Richard Wright KC made a desperate attempt to mitigate the minimum term of imprisonment. Attorney Wright argued that on the night of the homicide, Michael Doherty was in a state of extreme intoxication, compounded by a highly complicated, long-standing mental health picture. The defense attempted to frame the sadistic assault as a spontaneous act of drug-induced psychosis rather than premeditated malice. However, Judge Guy Curl KC thoroughly demolished these arguments with absolute contempt. The judge looked directly at the defense table and delivered a crushing, definitive statement that stripped away any hope of leniency. You have, by your actions, changed the lives of all of those who knew Courtney Angus forever. But worse than that, you took her life in a senseless rage, as I find, after she had rejected you. The judge stated with absolute clarity that the graphic photos preserved on his phone exposed the true depth of his depravity, proving that he took active pleasure in physically and sexually dominating a vulnerable woman. With these scathing remarks, Judge Guy Curl KC officially handed down the maximum penalty permitted under English law, life imprisonment with a strict, mandatory minimum term of 33 years before he can ever be considered for parole. The 38-year-old monster was permanently removed from civilized society, condemned to spend the rest of his natural life staring at the concrete walls of a maximum security cell. The absolute finality of the law, no matter how severe, can never truly heal the profound grief or fill the immense void carved into the hearts of Courtney Angus's family. In an emotional victim impact statement read before a silent, weeping courtroom, Courtney's mother, Diane Angus, delivered words that laid bare the agonizing reality of their loss. Losing my daughter has left a space in my heart that nothing can fill. I carry her with me in every thought, every breath, every moment. I wish I could hold her again. I grieve not only for her but for the life that was taken from us. Mrs. Angus noted that the grief never fades with time. It simply alters its shape, remaining a permanent weight in her daily existence. Speaking on behalf of her sisters, Chloe Angus stated that the image of Courtney lying inside the mortuary, bearing the marks of such calculated cruelty, will haunt their minds for the rest of their lives. The family posed a devastating question to society. How could someone hurt a young, vulnerable woman in the way that he did? Courtney had her whole life ahead of her. She had just turned 21. She was loved deeply by everyone around her. The sisters' online tribute stands as a heartbreaking monument to a stolen life. Forever 21, our girl. We love you always and forever, Courtney. Today in 2026, as this dark legal file officially closes, the tragedy of Courtney Angus remains an enduring warning for the digital age regarding the necessity of identifying critical red flags in isolated social environments. When an individual attempts to weaponize their own life through suicide threats to force emotional compliance, it is never an expression of love. It is the ultimate warning sign of an abusive, narcissistic controller. Society must recognize these patterns, enforce strict personal boundaries, and seek immediate protection from law enforcement before a volatile situation escalates behind closed doors. Simultaneously, this case stands as a fierce rejection of the toxic online trend that seeks to glamorize and romanticize violent offenders based on an edgy aesthetic. True justice requires us to tear down the filters of digital illusion, turn away from the monsters, and forever honor the lives of the innocent. Let the beautiful soul and radiant smile of Courtney Angus be remembered, while her killer remains buried in the silence of his permanent isolation. May Courtney rest in eternal peace.